Welcome to City of Keene in Focus. Thanks so much for listening. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to our next episode of City of Keene in Focus. My name is Asa Kramer, and I am joined with our city manager, Elizabeth Furland. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Asa.
Hi. So we're going to talk about a lot of important discussions happening in the community right now. We're going to talk quickly about the Community Power Program and the discussion that was had at council last night. We'll talk about budget a little bit, and then we'll have a good long discussion about the fire department and the staffing there. So last night was city council meeting, and it was a long one.
It was a long one. There was a lot of conversation last night about community power. It was a hot topic. It was debated among the council members as to what the default option should be for the community power plan the next time we go out to bid. And really, a lot of the conversation was tied to affordability. And even though the plan offers options to choose more green energy and pay a little bit more, or choose less and pay a little bit less, many of the councilors were concerned that the default option would put a lot of people into a plan with 50% green energy that they may not be able to afford. And most of the concerns were about how do we better communicate with the community, the residents, the people who are purchasing the power, so that they understand that they do, in fact, have options. Last night we talked a little bit about how we did the outreach the last time we adopted the community power plan and the last time we went out to bid. And there really is an extensive outreach that occurs when these plans are adopted and right before we go out to bid. People receive postcards in the mail, allowing them 30 days to opt out of our plan. There's public meetings, there's social media posts. There's a lot of ways we reach out, and that will occur again this time as we update the community power plan and as we prepare to go out to bid. So the current power contract goes through the end of December. And so sometime in the next few months, when the power rates are the lowest, we will go out to bid again. But the first step is submitting the community power plan to the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, for approval and adoption. There are some minor changes in language throughout the plan, and there's some additional language in there that creates some flexibility for future bidding, and that needs to be approved by the PUC before we can go out to bid.
I do have a question for you. So you mentioned that there were lots of mailers that went out with all the information about community power and the different options. I think people right now are very sensitive to being scammed.
Yeah.
So what should they be looking for in the postcard that is proof that it's legitimate?
That is a great point and a great question. So there are a lot of third-party energy suppliers who are mailing people. I get them at my house. It's hard to know which one of them are real valid choices and which may be a scam. And so one of the things I will be talking to our consultant about is making sure that the city's logo or information is on that postcard that they receive so that they know that it is a legitimate communication. The actual mailing of the postcards, those are prepared by our consultant, Good Energy. So it may be confusing. And so I do want to double check that this time before it goes out to make sure people can identify it as a City of Keene communication. But if they have a question, I just encourage everybody to call and check first, because people are getting pretty creative on how they are scamming individuals. And so call and ask if you have a question. So last night, the council decided to keep 4 options in the community power plan. So the basic option, which is going to be your most affordable option, has only the amount of energy that is required to be in all products required by the state of New Hampshire. So that is at 25%. The current default in the plan that we're in right now that goes through December is at 35%. So unless you opt down or up for more green energy, that's where you're currently at, so 35%. In the new bid, the 50% option will become the new default. So there will be 50% green or renewable energy in that option. That is the one that people will convert to. So if you're right now at the 35% level, In the new plan, you will be at the 50% level. However, you can change that at any time. So you have lots of options. So when that happens and when we go out to bid and those postcards are mailed out, you'll have 30 days to just opt out of the plan entirely and stay with Eversource as your provider or go with a different third-party vendor. If you decide later, so let's say you miss that 30-day window and you're now in the 50% default option and you find that it's too expensive, you can opt out at any time without any charge, and you can opt back in at any point as well. So the thing about these electricity rates is that they fluctuate. And many of the options are for shorter terms. So if you go on and you look at the New Hampshire Department of Energy website and you shop electric rates, you will see that some of the options are for 6 months, some of them are for a year, or some maybe for 2 years. And so you really need to take a look at what you're agreeing to when you agree to some of those third-party providers. But for our community power plan, there's no term, even though the city will have a contract. And we don't know for sure. It will depend on pricing when we go out to bid, but it could be a contract for 30 months. During that 30-month period of time, the energy rates are going to fluctuate. So you can choose to stay with the plan and just keep a stable rate throughout the 30-month period, or you can shop your rate and change. So you could change to another third party. You could change to the New Hampshire Community Coalition Power Program through Cheshire County. Anyone who resides in the county can become part of their power program. And then let's say Cheshire County's rates are lower for several months and you decide to switch and you go there. Then their rates increase because typically their rates are every 6 months. If at the end of that period of time the rates increase and now our rates are lower, again, it's like a 5-minute call to call and change back to the community power plan. And then you can pick when you do that which option you want. Do you want the basic option at 25%, the most affordable? Do you want the 35% renewable option, which will be the next affordable option and the one that you're currently probably in right now if you're in our default? Or do you want to go to the new default at 50%? Or if you're really concerned about climate and you don't mind paying the extra money each year, you can opt up to 100% renewable. And so you have lots and lots of options. And when you make these calls, all you need is your electricity bill with your account information. It takes about 30 days, so it's a billing cycle depending upon when you call to make the change over to the new supplier. But it is relatively painless to be able to swap whenever you want and really take advantage of the options out there. That was the majority of the conversation last night at council meeting, but we did have other very important topics on the agenda last night. One thing I know that will get a lot of attention at MSFI, so the next MSFI committee meeting, is there's a group that's coming back to talk about installation of a peace pole in Central Square. And if you remember, we had talked about potentially incorporating something related to this peace pole concept into a new fountain. And this group worked with Andy Bohannon, our deputy city manager, and they prepared a request for proposals. They went out for bid. They did get an artist to submit, but the group ultimately decided that was not what they really wanted to do. And so they're coming back to talk to the council about doing a separate peace pole installation. So that will be on the next MSFI agenda. And then this didn't get a lot of conversation last night. It did get some conversation at committee. There was a group that came in to talk about downtown business employee parking options, and they were concerned about safety, they were concerned about distance to parking options, and they were concerned about having long-term options that were affordable. We did meet with the two individuals that brought forward that initial concern, and we talked about some options that are currently available to them. And so we did report that back out to committee. That was at the last FOP committee. And then so last night it was accepted as informational. But one thing we didn't talk about was that this is really an ongoing conversation. I've had some additional meetings with parking to talk about with the downtown project. It might be an opportunity for us to do things a little differently. We are looking at the Wells Garage to look at, is there a potential for utilizing those spaces in a different way? Right now, if you drive down to the Wells Garage, you'll see that often during the day, a lot of those spaces are empty, and it's because they are being reserved 24 hours a day through a permit, and they're paying a higher price for that permit. But we might not have the right mix of permits and long-term permits or short-term permits, and so we're going to take a look at the utilization of the Wells Garage and whether or not there's some opportunities there. So while last night it was accepted as informational, there are still conversations happening related to parking and potential opportunities for a downtown employee parking program in the future. The other thing that we've been looking at is adding some flexibility to parking in the downtown. So right now, depending upon where you're parked, you're in a zone. So you're in a parking zone and you pay to park in that zone. And one of the things that we've heard is that people would like to be able to pay to park and then move to other zones or move to other spaces and still be able to use the time that they have available. Chelsea has been working with Rebecca Landry and looking at how we might be able to increase the flexibility of parking in the downtown. So when you pay to park, that you could park potentially in more than one location. And I think that makes a lot of sense if people do want to move from one part of the downtown to another and they have time. We've also been looking at other communities do on-demand type parking. So if you park longer than the 2 hours but are willing to pay a higher fee, that's another option. So they're looking at all sorts of ways to change the parking model to hopefully fit the downtown better in the future. So more to come on that.
Great. I love that parking is remaining so flexible to try and meet the needs of Keene specifically and is open to these ideas. I think that's really cool.
I give a lot of credit to the parking department, Chelsea and her team, and Rebecca. They've really been looking at creating as much flexibility as possible and being as responsive as possible. And a shout out to the Public Works Department as well. I mean, this recent change for the overnight parking in the downtown, I think we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback. Yes, we hit some bumps along the way while we were implementing that, but we get some great feedback from the people who live downtown. So definitely more to come on that topic. So there was a couple of other items that there wasn't action on last night other than to refer them to committee, but they are important topics to talk about. One is related to adopting the provisions of RSA 79E, which is something that we already have in place. It is a tax incentive for people to invest in their property, and if they meet certain criteria, they can apply to the council for, it's really like a deferment of tax increase. They pay at their base level that they're currently at, but those improvements don't get taxed for a period of time depending upon what they're doing and how much council grants for the number of years. So that's coming back because when we did the land use code, we changed several definitions in the downtown and there were some boundary changes as well, but we didn't change the 79E map. So that's our first step. We need to do that. In essence, it's not really changing anything other than making the two maps align, but that's really the beginning of the conversation because a few years ago, the state adopted, and actually at the time, Senator Khan, now our mayor, yeah, he put forward some legislation related to 79E and residential housing projects. And we have not taken advantage of that since it was adopted. And so Med Kopczynski, who's doing some contract work for us around housing projects, this is one of the things that he's been tasked with. I've asked him to look at 79E and I've asked him to look at this residential housing component of 79E as to whether or not there's some opportunity for us to encourage housing in neighborhoods or even some rehabilitation of housing in neighborhoods. It's a win-win. So when someone is investing in their property, if they receive this 79E, they are still going to pay those additional taxes later. They're not paying less, they're paying the same. But they have an opportunity to recoup some of those expenses that they've invested by this deferment of additional taxes. And so I think it's a great tool. It's one that we've used successfully here in the city, and it's one that's been used successfully in other cities and towns across the state. And so now looking at this residential component makes a lot of sense. And so this first action is just about aligning the two maps. But the next time we come in related to 79E, it will be more about how do we use it to encourage residential development and rehabilitation. The other thing that came in last night and was referred to committee is going to Finance Committee. It's an important topic that I've talked about on this podcast a few times. It's related to our fire department and our ambulance service. We have been looking at the number of calls and the impact to the department really since Deluzio closed their doors, and evaluating what it's meant to the department when Cheshire EMS got their services up and running, and how would the call volume change for us. And it's very clear that the call volume has changed for us. The skilled nursing facilities are causing a dramatic increase in our call volume, and the acuity levels at these calls are requiring more manpower, and that's taking people away from the department for longer periods of time. That means the same number of people are responding to more calls, which means every shift they're busier than they were ever before. And that's placing a lot of stress on the people who work in that department. And they've been doing their very best to continue to provide quality services to the residents, but also the visitors, the people who are coming into the community. But we've been talking to the council for a while now about a longer range plan. One of the first things we did was come in with a request to apply for a SAFER grant. The SAFER grant would allow us to add 4 additional firefighters per shift. So that's 16 people. And that SAFER grant would fund potentially those 16 people for the first 3 years, and then it would become 100% funded by the community, the taxpayers. That's a big expense. It's definitely something that, if we got the grant, would allow us time to be able to find ways to mitigate that expense before it actually becomes 100% all the city of Keene. But in the meantime, we need to be able to staff the 3rd ambulance. So right now, our staffing level does not allow us to continuously staff that 3rd ambulance. Working with the chief and the deputy and the union president, we've come in with a request to the city council to fund some additional funds to the fire department for the remainder of this fiscal year, and those funds would go to the fire department's overtime line. That would allow us to go from a minimum staffing of 10 to a minimum staffing of 12. What that means is we will be paying people overtime to come in, but it will spread the calls out. Now, we did this during COVID. It's an expensive way to run the 3rd ambulance, but when you're trying to come up with a temporary solution, it's the fastest thing you can do to help alleviate that problem. So we're hoping the council will approve the additional allocation of those funds through the FOP process next week, and then ultimately when it reaches the city council, the following council meeting. But that's just the next step. The SAFER grant is a longer range plan. The overtime funds is a short-term Band-Aid. Coming up to the next fiscal year, we need to have a plan for how we will address it for the next 12 months. So say in September we find out we're awarded the SAFER grant. Then we need to go through the process to accept the grant and to hire the additional firefighters. That process takes a long time. To fully get up to staff and then get people trained and operational in the fire trucks or on the ambulance, it's a long time. I mean, we're talking really to get fully operational a couple of years, depending upon the qualifications of the people that are hired. So we need a solution for this upcoming fiscal year. As part of the budget review that I'm doing right now, there's a substantial increase being requested by the department to just support the SAFER grant. So it's about $280,000 of additional funds for gear and training and things that we need that will not be paid for by the SAFER grant. 5%. So we know that's already going to be a significant impact to the bottom line of the budget. But I am planning to bring in to this FOP a request to immediately hire 4 additional firefighters, which would be 1 firefighter per shift. That would allow us to move much more quickly into getting additional help to the fire department. The funds would need to come from what's called our unassigned fund balance. I do believe that we can do this, and we can do this in a responsible way, and it'll allow us to also offset some of those overtime funds that I'm now requesting for just the remainder of our fiscal year. It does 2 things for us. If we can get more firefighters into the department, which will allow us to staff that 3rd ambulance, it puts more people into rotation so that when we have people out for FMLA, for a vacation day, for a sick day, whatever the case may be, instead of always relying on someone to come in on overtime, we have someone to put into the rotation. It also just allows us the time to get people trained and fully operational on the ambulance and on the fire truck sooner. That's something that I'm working on with the fire chief. This is going to be the first time the council hears this proposal at FOP. And we will still need to get a resolution, which will require a first reading at the council meeting. Then gets referred back to FOP, and then it would get approved. So all of these things take time, but I think this is the most expedient way for us to get some relief to the fire department.
As an example of how drastically the call volume has changed, since you and I have been sitting here, I have counted I don't know if they're coming across on the microphones, but I've counted the sirens about 5 times.
Yeah, the need to be able to respond to these calls is critical. There's a lot more to come on this as well, Asa.
Yeah.
You know, we're very fortunate. We have great people working for this community across the organization. They are doing it because they believe in what they do, not just the fire department, honestly, every department. The people in these departments who are here, they are just continuing to step up every single day, regardless of what's happening, and to meet the needs of the community. And I have to say, it's just extremely impressive. And I'm really, really proud to work for this community and to work with the people who are here in this organization. So, Asa, I think that's it for me. Those were the topics from last night. I will mention one more. I always say think that's it, but there's one more. So we are looking at the Black Brook TIF. That's another tax incentive that encourages development. So a TIF district is a little different than a 79E district. So a TIF district requires what's called a financing plan. And typically what happens in a TIF district is a development wants to come in and do a project, but they need public infrastructure. So maybe it's water and sewer, maybe it's roads and sidewalks, whatever it may be. And they bring forward their proposal that would add X amount of dollars to the tax base. And if they were to do that and sign a development agreement with the city could then agree to do the public infrastructure that they are requiring, and that public infrastructure would be paid for by the additional revenue from the TIF district itself once those new developments were in place. So this has been successfully done in the city a few times. We have some large parcels that are located in the Black Brook TIF. That TIF district has been dormant for a number of years. The financing plans have been all paid off, but it is still in place. We've had a realtor come in. They just came to FOP last week and requested that we take a look at that TIF district and asked if the council would be interested in looking at a potential development plan and financing plan for public infrastructure to support a development in that area. And one of the large parcels was Smith Medical's property. So that's a large parcel in that area. And last night, all the council did was authorize the city manager to begin negotiations with potential developers on projects that would be located in the TIF district. Then, if a plan is created for a property in the TIF district that requires public infrastructure, the financing plan would need to go through a public process. It would need to be brought back to the council. There would be public hearings, and then it would finally be approved, hopefully, or denied, but it would be considered through the public process before it was finalized. But before spending time talking to developers about the potential of that, I wanted the council to weigh in and to give us some direction.
Great. So lots of really important things, lots of really important discussions going on, it sounds like. Is there anything else of the 8 million things you have on your desk? Is there anything else that you want to talk about today?
Well, my life right now is budget, budget, budget. We are in the process of reviewing department requests for fiscal 26 budgets. The department heads have been working on their budgets for a few months now. They've submitted them to me, and now we are having individual meetings to review those submissions. We focus a lot on supplemental requests, which means what's new, what's changed. But we've also had conversations about levels of service and projects. So one of the things that we've been spending a lot of time on is when a project is put forward in the capital plan, understanding what that means for the operating budget. So when a project for a park is approved, we have this beautiful new park, Pat Russell Park, and we have the skate park, which was created thanks to generous donations by people in the community. But those things have to be maintained. Future planning for that maintenance is important, and I think it's been something that it's been done in the past, but it's not been done consistently. There's a level of, maintenance that the community expects, and for us to meet that requires people. And so those are the conversations we're having right now. This budget process is, I think, going to be, I've been here not quite 8 years, almost 8 years, and I think this is going to be the most difficult year, I believe, for a variety of reasons. And, there's a lot of pressure from what's happening at the state level with funding sources, and then just the pressure on the local school tax and how that's impacting the overall community tax rate. And so it's the beginning of those conversations. Those will be some important conversations between now and the date that's adopted sometime in June.
Definitely. Well, is there anything else that you want to talk about today?
I think that's it.
All right. I will just mention we have a couple of meetings coming up. Wednesday is MSFI, Wednesday the 26th, and that's at 6. Thursday is FOP, the 27th at 6 p.m. And happy spring, by the way, officially. If you have nothing else, I think we'll wrap up for today.
I think that's it.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening to City of Keene in Focus. We'll see you next time.